Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest, and we're departing from our usual um, format because of the importance I place on the Library of America. With so much of American history being attacked today, it's nice to know there's an organization that's preserving what I consider the keynote to civilization, which is books, printed books in particular. We have with us Max Rubin. He's president of the Library of America, and we welcome Max to the program.
Thank you, Don. I'm very pleased to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Well, Max, we're so proud to have you with us. Max, as we ask all our guests, tell us a little bit about yourself, then about your organization, well, and what its aims are, and finally, how people can learn more.
Sure. Well, I can tell you about myself in a fairly brief few sentences because unlike most people in publishing, I've worked for the same place for about 40 years. So I began consulting to Library of America when it was first starting up in the late 70s, early 80s. I was a graduate student at Columbia University in American literature and history and comparative literature. I had planned to go on to an academic teaching career, but I got very interested in the work that I was doing at the Library of America and decided to stay. And it's been an amazing journey, I have to say. And well, I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. But in 1979, well, let me go back and say that in the late 60s, the literary critic Edmund Wilson called for a national edition of American writing. He noticed that certain other countries had such a thing. In France, they have the Bibliothèque de la Pléiade, where you can always find good editions of the important French writers. And he pointed out that in America, for various reasons, that wasn't the case, that there were a lot of Melville's works, for example, that weren't available, that went in and out of print, driven by the vagaries of the marketplace, and that there should be some place where readers could go to find reliable editions of the important American writers. He didn't live to see that dream fulfilled, but he passed the baton to a group of founders, academics, foundation people, and publishing people who in 1979 got seed funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Ford Foundation to create the Library of America to be, as I say, a definitive national library of great American writers. And I came on board very early on in the summer of 1980. And our first books were published in 1982. And, we've been publishing books ever since. We just passed our 350th volume. And, I would say that we've always defined the editorial mission broadly and in a way which honors the democratic inclusiveness, the many voices that go to make up American literary culture. So not only does Library of America publish authoritative editions of acknowledged, great novelists, Hawthorne, Faulkner, James Baldwin, and poets, and but also historians, journalists, crime writers, science fiction writers, and also even the voices of ordinary Americans, that eloquent voices of Americans caught up in extraordinary circumstances, like during the Civil War, during World War II. So, as I say, it's both the best that's been thought and said by Americans under American circumstances, and also kind of a record of the American experience told through its most eloquent voices. That's a short answer, anyway, of who we are. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I should also say, we have a kind of educational and cultural purpose. And from the beginning, the organization has been mission rather than market driven. That is to say, we publish books that deserve to be out in the world, that whether they will sell enough copies to pay for themselves, we hope many of them will, or whether they don't. And we hope that the former will balance the latter. And I'm sure we'll get into what the business model and economic model is as we talk.
Okay. And your website?
Yeah, the website is LOA.org, which is Library of America, LOA.org, and has, I would say that I should say that the web, as the website makes clear, our mission is twofold. It's both to publish books, but also to provide understanding and appreciation of American writing, which we do in various ways through our website, which you'll find lots of material there about the books and about the writers, but also through programming, which we do. And we have an online, we have an online programming series called LOA Live, where we connect readers directly with gifted critics and scholars and writers and others to talk about subjects that are inspired by Library of America volumes that are timely in one way or another. I should probably say that one thing that's unusual, well, a couple things are unusual about Library of America, and that are the reason behind our kind of nonprofit status. One is the quality of the books, which and the fact that we subsidize the price to the end user. The books are printed with a quality that's really barely seen these days in American publishing, and I could go into more of that. But acid-free paper, which will never yellow or turn brittle, books which lie flat when they're opened. As I say, authoritative text, Rubin markers. And we take the idea of authoritative text seriously, which is to say that our editorial staff researches the printing and publishing history of everything we publish to make sure that the version we publish is the one that the author wanted in the world. Often that research doesn't find anything remarkable, and we reprint the version that might otherwise be available, but occasionally it hits pay dirt. And one of the examples I give is the day that we sent a researcher up to Yale's Beinecke Library to look at the copy of Native Son that Richard Wright had submitted to his publisher. And he compared that typescript to the published version and found many differences, including an entire chapter that was missing and many other changes. And further research showed that the book had been expurgated at the request of Book of the Month Club, which wanted to offer it as the first main selection by an African-American writer. This was in 1940, but thought that there were certain passages that, for reasons of politics or sexuality, were a little too strong for their mainstream audience, and asked Wright if he'd be willing to leave them out. And Wright was not happy about it, but I think, rightly felt that the main selection by an African-American writer was an important milestone, so he agreed. But it was a case where we were able to publish that novel for the first time as Richard Wright intended it to be read. And that's happened a couple other times too. With we've published restored corrected texts of Faulkner, of Hemingway, of Zora Neale Hurston, and other writers. So anyway, that's kind of what we mean by textual authority when we say that that's also one of the unique things about the Library of America series.
Well, I'm going to ask a question. Some people are saying that books are passe today. What do you say to that?
That they're wrong. And I would point to two things. First of all, just in terms of objectively, in terms of the facts, the top line number, sales of books, the number of dollars spent on books has been pretty unchanged since, I don't know, whatever date you want to pick, 2007, 2008, 2012. So just, factually speaking, there has been no lowering of the amount of money spent on books. The thing I would point to more specifically in our case is, something very unusual happened in the past 2 years, partly, inspired by the pandemic and by the racial justice protests of 2020, 2021, which is that we saw an explosion of interest in Library of America's list. People turned to Library of America for, to our African-American writers, to Frederick Douglass, to James Weldon Johnson, to W.B. Du Bois, and to James Baldwin in particular, for a better understanding of what was going on around them. And that was one thing. And also, there were a lot of questions about American democracy going on in the last years of the Trump administration, and a lot of polarization, and people turned to the founding generation on our list, Thomas Jefferson, to James Madison. So what we found was that we were serving more readers in 2020-21 than we ever had in the entire history of Library of America. So for us, it's been, I would say, exactly the opposite. Rather than seeing a decline, we've seen what's the opposite? An incline, a growth, as people, I think, there's something about great writing. I think, what is it? James Forbes, the minister of Riverside Church, said, "Deep calls unto deep," and what he meant by that was that momentous events lend new profundity to great writing. And people turn to great writing at moments of crisis, and I think that was clearly the case in the last couple of years, and we're still seeing that.
Max, I'm going to interrupt you.
Please.
So, you're talking to the wrong camera. Talk. Matt,
Okay.
that's the
right.
one you should talk to.
I got you.
Forget the rest.
Sure. So anyway, just to say that we are now, generally seeing our readership at least 25% greater than it was before the pandemic. So we're seeing exactly the opposite of a decline in interest in books and a decline in interest in great books. I mean, obviously that's an anecdote that applies to us, but I think it's true industry-wide. And in fact, the industry is wrestling now with supply chain issues, which have to do in part with extraordinary demand for books. That's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that, like many nonprofit organizations, cultural organizations during the pandemic, we had to pivot our programming from in-person to online. And what we saw there, again, was an explosion of interest. So whereas before we would do events for 50 or 75 people, like most big book events, at a bookstore or whatever, we started doing events online. We started with with two programs, one about James Baldwin and one about American conservatism, the intellectual tradition of American conservatism, and then another one about Alexander Hamilton. Those programs drew upwards of 800, 900, 1,000 people from all 50 states and now 63 countries and territories around the world. So just as another measure of interest. And so just to say to your readership, I mean, we now offer these free programs that are being tuned in to from globally now. And so I would say that, like many nonprofits, for 40 years, 39 years, we asked ourselves, well, here we have this national, or you could say international mission, but we're physically located in New York. How do we serve, a national audience when it's tough to do that outside of New York? And, the internet has been the answer, as it has been for many organizations.
Your website again for our audience?
It's LOA.org or www.loa.org. LOA stands for Library of America.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the books and how you create them so they don't yellow with age, etc.
Yes.
I have certain books that have been with me for 40 years, 50 years, and they're yellow now, unfortunately.
Right. So we're pledged. We only use acid-free paper, special acid-free paper with high opacity. The opacity is so that we can use a fairly thin sheet, but that it won't have show through, to the next page. So they're highly readable. As I say, the acid-free paper is what assures that it won't yellow or turn brittle. And we guarantee the books for 500 years. So you can pass them down with confidence to your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. The other thing, as I say, is we have the paper milled with the grain so that when the books open, when the books open, they lie flat. So you don't have to, you can read them while you're having lunch without propping them open with the salt and pepper shaker, as you have to do with a lot of books. There are other special features I could talk about, but the book is, the production values, I would say, are extremely high, as high as the editorial values are. And yet, our nonprofit status allows us to subsidize the end price to the user. So a book which would cost, at normal margins for a commercial publisher, $65, $70, we sell for $35 or $40.
Well, let's talk about that, which I think is very important. There are ways for individuals to subsidize publication. Can you talk a little bit about that program, please?
Yeah. So the big picture is that unusually, I think, for a cultural nonprofit, we are about 2/3 or 70% self-supporting through sales of books. So 65 to 75% of our budget is through book sales. The other third we raise in a number of ways, and so there are many ways for people to support what we do. On the one hand, we have a membership program and an annual fund drive. If you're on our mailing list, you can make a donation to the Library of America to help us support our mission and our work. You can become a member, Library of America. The lowest level is $60, and it goes up from there with different benefits for membership as you go up. And then if you want to help our work in a more substantial way, we also have a program called the Guardians of American Letters Fund, which allows an individual or a foundation or a combination of those to help and to endow a book to help keep it in print forever, basically. So that program right now, we ask for a donation or an endowment of $75,000, and you choose or adopt a book, and that book forever says, this book is kept in print, through a generous gift from X. And about half the books that we have published are endowed. We would like to get them all endowed. And on our website, if you click on the menu item that says support, you'll see the Guardians list, which books are available for adoption. And as I say, it's all over the map. Sometimes people will endow a book in memory of an ancestor. Our Civil War volumes, several of them are endowed in memory of an ancestor who fought in the Civil War or in World War I, for example, or just because the person has a particular love for, well, here's an example. So we publish a 2-volume edition of American musicals, the books and lyrics of great American musicals. One of them is endowed by a woman named Candace Wainwright, whose father was Alfred Drake, who starred in Broadway in Kiss Me, Kate and Oklahoma. So there are many different connections. But the books, as I say, are available for adoption. Also, if there's a particular forthcoming project that you are interested in helping us publish, we also seek publication support for future volumes. So anyway, as I said, through a variety of means, we raise about 1/3 of our budget each year, which these days comes to between $2 and $2.5 million a year.
Well, how do you decide which books to publish? Can someone come to you and say, "Oh, gee, we think that John Doe should be published"? How do you decide what to
Yeah.
publish?
Yeah. Well, I would say for one thing, we have a very long wish list,
Mhm.
of books we hope to publish someday that are awaiting either, sometimes they're awaiting support, sometimes they're awaiting the right occasion, sometimes they're awaiting the right editor. Um, but to your particular question, yes, ideas for, and I should also say that what gets published in a given year depends on a lot of factors. As I say, in each year, we try to balance, titles that we hope will sell enough copies to pay for themselves with the ones that we know won't. So there's that. We try to balance books that are primarily for an audience interested in imaginative literature with those for an audience interested in American history. And then we try to, combine authors who we think are kind of obvious, like any series that called itself Library of America would have this writer, with some surprises, each year. I can give examples of all that. But in terms of where ideas come from, yes, they come from all over the place. Some of them are generated in-house. Some of them come from scholars. Some of them come from readers. I can't try to think of examples of all of these, but yes, if you have an idea for a book that you think belongs in the Library of America, you can absolutely write us, email us. Several of our ideas have come that way.
Well, you know how I feel about the Fortunate Pilgrim by Mario Puzo.
Yes.
To me, it's really one of the great Italian American books of any generation.
Right. Well, I have no doubt that Mario Puzo will find his place in Library of America. Sometimes it's a matter of figuring out how to publish. I mean, if, for example, if their view is that The Fortunate Pilgrim stands out as Puzo's greatest book, then the question would be, because Library of America books tend to be omnibus editions that include several works. So in some cases, we do books that are devoted to particular writers, but in some cases we do books that are devoted to genres. So we have collections of great crime novels, we have collections of great science fiction novels, so sometimes books find their way into the series that way as well.
Well, I hope so. It's only because it's my generation, that book. So,
Yes.
of course, I have to. I'm telling you, I'm biased. um, we have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
Max, where do you see the future of the Library of America and publishing in general?
Well, I mean, it's a big question. I would say, in terms of Library of America, we've only just begun to fight. I mean, I think that there's in terms of, well, I'll put it this way. When I started work in Library of America, which was in 1980, the 1920s and 30s were as far away as the 1960s and 70s are now, and we've only really begun to publish the great writers from that period. So I see that as an unfolding project. And we have, we plan at least 3 years in advance, and we have a long list of writers we want to do. The question of, and then also I would say we've just discovered, I would say, how to serve the mission in a way which is national and global, through programming. And I think that is a huge opportunity for Library of America. Both just in terms of audience development in general, we now, as I say, regularly do events for, 700, 800 people where we weren't before. And a third of those people we found are new to Library of America. So the more we do that, the more we're building our audience. And I see that as only something that continues to grow. in terms of publishing more broadly, I mean, as I say, despite all the attention that, ebooks got, they don't get so much attention anymore. And other things, I mean, the audience for I say serious, I don't really mean serious, I mean, but the audience for substantive, books has not really changed that much. If anything, it's grown lately. So I don't see the audience for the future of books being any danger at all. I mean, I would say that in terms of demand, I think where the challenge is right now is in terms of supply, which who would have thought that would be a challenge? But it's turned out that the extraordinary increase in demand for books, we're talking about 25, 30% more than before, has put an incredible demand on the book printing industry and transportation, which it is having trouble meeting. So I think that the challenges going forward, and we thought that they would be over by the end of 2022, it looks like that will not be the case now, is going to be on that. Will more, and because printing capacity had been in decline. So the question is, will more printers come online? Will more capacity come online? How will that change? And I think that, the best minds in terms of the supply chain issues, which is not my area, I have to say, are really focused on that right now. And I think that that's something that has to be solved. The other big question for publishing is discovery, or discoverability, as they say. I mean, one of the results of the decline of bookstores, where you would go in and you would see a curated selection of what you might want to read. That's what retail did so well. Online doesn't do that so well. You don't, much less well, I should say. So the question in terms of how you discuss, and also there's been a decline in terms of bookstore shelf space and a decline in terms of review page space. So both of those things were the ways that readers discovered what they wanted to read next.
Right.
So the question is, how do people discover now what they want to read next? And that's a big challenge going forward. I mean, word of mouth has replaced a lot of what retail and book reviews used to do. It's great in some ways, not great in other ways. So I'd say that going forward in terms for publishing, those are the two big things that are looming: the kind of discoverability / marketing question, and the printing / supply chain question. But and we're wrestling with those too in our way. But I think that in terms of discoverability, and I think what we found is that as we pursue the kind of programmatic side of our mission, we're also helping to solve in some ways the discoverability question as well.
Well, on that note, I just have to. Last year was the first year that self-published fiction books were more self-published fiction books were published than the publishers did.
Yeah.
And that to me, but the biggest problem with any self-published book is how do you get people to know about it?
Right. Exactly right. And so I think that, I mean, that illustrates something very interesting, which is that the barrier to entry has been lowered to publishing. I mean, the barrier to entry has been lowered to the point where anyone, literally anyone, can publish a book, but it just exacerbates or makes more urgent this other question of discoverability. Like, how does the reader find what to read next? And as I say, there's a lot of answers to that. I mean, I would say in our case also, we have one other advantage, I guess you could say, is that, we not only sell books through retail, through bookstores and through Amazon, but we also sell direct to consumer. We sell directly to readers, both by subscription, we always have from the beginning, by subscription, and through our web store, www.loa.org. And so we have ways to reach readers directly, which I now, which we've always done since we first started publishing in 1982. In fact, early on, the subscription was the heart of the business of Library of America. That changed a lot with the rise of the internet. But I think a lot of publishers now are coming around to something that we've always known, which is that it's very, the more you can have direct connection to the people who read your books, the better off you are. And that's always been something that the Library of America has had.
Well, on that note, Max Rubin, give us one last time your website, and thank you for a very illuminating time.
www.loa.org. And as I say, what you'll find there is not only ways to purchase books and ways to find out about our programs, but you'll find lots of fascinating content about American writers and American history and American books. So even if you're not a buyer, check it out, and I think you'll find a lot there to explore.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Max.
Thank you, Don. I really appreciate it.